relevant to today are delusions about money that occur either that I can't afford my food, my medical care, my medications, when in fact you can, or the other side of the coin. I'm going to keep playing this lottery till I win. I'm going to keep sending in my $5,000 and $10,000 checks to this guy who calls me from Jamaica because they told me I'm going to win a $500,000 prize if I keep doing this. And they keep doing it despite evidence to the contrary. So these are the kind of delusions that we see, the most common in older adults. Delusions, let me go back a slide, delusions typically occur in the context of cognitive dysfunction. Have you heard that phrase before? Have you heard dementia? Have you heard Alzheimer's disease? If your life depended on it, could you explain the difference among those three concepts and where they have in common? You couldn't. Well, let's look at that. Cognitive function. If we're going to talk about cognitive dysfunction, what is cognitive function? It's what you and I are doing right now. It's a seamless combination of literally dozens of individual intellectual functions that your brain performs. And what you see on this slide are key intellectual functions. The reason they're key is in older adults who develop dementia, these are the intellectual areas that are most commonly impaired. So memory, grossly we can say short-term memory. What did you have for breakfast just 2 hours ago? And long-term memory, what was the name of your third grade teacher? You can get that, right? Your brain handles those two questions differently, and those of you who've worked with older adults with dementia realize that the short term is usually badly impaired, but long term can remain intact for some time. Orientation, who am I, where am I, how do I get from where I am now to where I need to drive to this afternoon, and time orientation. And then you get into language, which is a commonly impaired area, but somewhat difficult to assess. Right now, you all are experiencing receptive language function. I'm demonstrating expressive language function, right? And if there's an error, if you're not understanding what I'm saying, you could be misinterpreted as not remembering what I'm saying if you're asked about it in an hour or two. So language dysfunction, both expressive and receptive, is a common impairment in older adults. Then you get into even more abstract and difficult to objectify areas such as visual spatial, where I am in space. I know that if I take 3 steps forward, I'm going to trip over this chair. I can understand spatial relationships. This presents in clinical practice as people who can't remember familiar faces or get lost in familiar places. That's a visual spatial dysfunction. You can also have problems in judgment and reasoning. Very difficult for me as an evaluator to objectify, but that's really where these delusions occur about financial abuse, judgment and reasoning. And finally, personality itself can be changed. So all of these things together, when they're working well, we don't think about them, but when we start to have impairment, you really can affect your daily functional abilities. What are common causes of dysfunction in older adults? And if I had asked you that before you saw this slide, you probably would have said Alzheimer's disease. Well, yeah, we're going to say that, but before, as a clinician, before I even think of dementia, if I'm thinking about the process properly, I need to exclude these other processes. Older adults, maybe they can't hear. Hearing impairment increases with aging. Or maybe they're not listening. That's not just older people. Have you ever tuned out your significant other? And you're sitting you're laughing because you've never done it, right? Yeah. Somebody's talking at you and telling you a story, and they say, well, what do you think? And you say, about what? And you could be misinterpreted as not remembering, when in fact, you just tuned them out. So these are things that you have to explore, and it's not a small process. It's very common. Delirium. Delirium is a medical word, and it has areas of overlap with dementia. What they have in common is cognitive dysfunction. But delirium is a change in mental status or your normal thinking ability due to a medical condition, an infection, a drug side effect. Those are common. And delirium characteristically comes and goes. It can come and stay, but more often it comes and goes. In contrast to that, dementia comes and stays. It doesn't go. And we'll look at that in a minute. Depression. Half of you in this room have personally experienced depression or been with a loved one. You know what it feels like. But in older adults, depression isn't so much a mood thing as a cognitive dysfunction. And that's actually not properly understood by many healthcare professionals. They don't think of depression as a cause of cognitive dysfunction in an older adult. And finally, dementia. So dementia is at the bottom of the list, what we call differential diagnosis. We have to exclude these other possibilities. And again, this is a quick and dirty. I could talk about any of these subjects for over an hour, but we're going to stick with it. So what is dementia? There are 4 key features that define dementia. Number 1, 2 or more intellectual areas that used to work just fine are impaired. Now, memory is very common, but it doesn't have to be memory. It can be one of their more abstract areas like language dysfunction or personality change, which means that many of the common tests that are used to look for dementia, which typically focus on orientation and memory, they can show up normal in someone who has significant dementia if their intellectual areas that are impaired are outside of what's being tested. You follow that? That's an important concept that's not well understood. The second point is that those deficits, 2 or more, are always there. So those of you who've spent time with older adults with dementia know that they have good days and bad days, but they don't have normal days. If they have cognitive dysfunction alternating with normal function, what do we call that? Delirium. That's a medical condition, probably a drug side effect. Number 3, because of these areas that are impaired, that are there every day, they need some type of assistance. Maybe they just need somebody helping them with their checkbook, or maybe they need 24/7 nursing home care, somewhere in the middle of that scale. So they have some degree of functional impairment. And finally, and this is something most physicians in my experience do not understand and appreciate, to say someone has dementia, you have to say they do not have delirium, they do not have an active psychiatric problem, which includes depression. So you have to be careful how these diagnoses are made. What are the common causes of dementia in older adults? It's a really short list, and you're looking at it. So Alzheimer's disease is the best known, best publicized. It's the one that's got an organization that supports fundraising and research. And it's really the prototype disease. Approximately half of older adults with dementia the cause of their dementia is Alzheimer's disease or something else. The something else is usually vascular dementia. Now, Alzheimer's disease is a disease of the brain. The brain cells themselves are the diseased process. Vascular dementia is a disease of the blood supply to the brain. The brain cells are innocent victims of hardening of the arteries, very similar to someone who has a heart attack or has bad circulation in their legs. So you may have had a stroke, you may not have any physical manifestations of the stroke, just cognitive manifestations. Or it can be more of a diffuse process without any evidence of stroke. But we see this when we do MRI and CT brain imaging. The most common diagnosis in my practice is mixed dementia. When I take the history and do the examination of the client, I really can't tell. Is it Alzheimer's? Is it vascular? There's elements that suggest both. So I call it mixed dementia, which is a bona fide diagnosis. 2 others, Lewy body dementia and frontotemporal, not rare diseases. They're not common, but they're not rare. And they're out there, and they occur in the same age population as Alzheimer's and vascular. And then finally, Parkinson's disease, which is primarily a movement disorder of shaking, tremor, difficulty walking, but that also can involve a dementia, usually later on in the disease. So now if I asked you, what's the difference between cognitive dysfunction, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease? Could you do a little better than 10 minutes ago? You going to remember that tomorrow? This is really important. This is a visual representation of the clinical manifestations, what they look like to their families, to you, to other people. So in the center, the prototype form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. It's really what we know most about and what people can identify with. But as you can see in the slide, the other common causes, vascular dementia, frontotemporal, and Lewy body, they have more in common with Alzheimer's disease than they have distinguishing features, which means that as a doctor, I can't tell what this person's dementia is due to. The best I can do as a clinical physician is to say, given all the information I have, I believe we're dealing with whatever it is. So anybody who says she has Alzheimer's disease, well, I'm going to question that doctor, because there's only one way we can know for sure what the cause of this person's dementia was, and that one way is autopsy, neuropathological study of the brain, which has to be done either at UVA or at MCV. It's not done in your local community. Now, here's what really relates this subject to financial abuse. Less than half of seniors who have dementia have a dementia diagnosis. So there's a lot of people out there walking around who do have dementia and have never been diagnosed. And if you look at their medical records, as I do when I evaluate them, there's no evidence of it. So if the routine health providers using routine office visit procedures will miss the diagnosis. Those of you who look at medical records, and what is the most common way that healthcare providers will describe mental status? Do you ever hear of oriented times 3, O times 3? Right. What that means is they're oriented to person, place, and time. That's the 3. But if I went up to Gwendolyn and I said, "Hi, how are you today?" And you said,
"Fine, thank you, and how are you?"
Good. Any problems?
No.
Anything you want to tell me about?
No.
She's O times 3. That's not laughable. That's real. That's about it. Okay? Is that a mental status exam? She could have severe dementia. I know her personally, and she does. She found her way here today, and I'm very impressed. Thank you for letting me pick on you. That'll teach you to talk to the speaker before he gets up, right? What is decision-making capacity? This is the focal point of a medical evaluation of an older adult who somebody thinks lacks the capacity to make a decision. Now again, in my context, it's usually an attorney like Chris who is in the process of a guardianship conservatorship hearing, which requires a medical evaluation. So they call me and they ask to evaluate. What is decision-making capacity? It's your capacity to make a specific decision. You're not going to hear me use the word competency. That's a legal phrase, not a medical phrase. Doctors do not determine competency. They can assess capacity. But it's very specific. Do you want fish or chicken for dinner tonight? Do you have the capacity to make that decision? But if I asked you, would you come in and rewire this room? I want you to rewire it so we can turn this room into a large air conditioning unit to freeze food. Do you have the capacity to do that? So, do you have capacity? Well, it depends on the question. That's what's key. So, decision-making capacity depends on the question at hand. Do you want your loving niece Sharon or your no-good son Billy to inherit your estate when you die? And what that shows is it depends on how you ask the question. Because people who are a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit insecure, feel a little bit out of their element, especially if they're sitting in a doctor's office or a lawyer's office, they can be led down a pathway depending on if you're a good questioner and you know how to ask questions. The key question I ask, particularly when it relates to power of attorney, if for some reason you couldn't make important decisions yourself, who do you trust to make decisions for you? And even somebody who doesn't know what day it is, doesn't know where they are, if they say, "Oh, I want my son Billy to do that," and then that to me could be intact capacity to name a power of attorney. So decision-making capacity is specific to the decision. We don't have data outside of medical settings, but this is data from studies in medical settings, that incapacity, the inability to make a decision, is common. Almost half of older adults admitted to an acute care hospital actually do not have the capacity to give medical consent, but they do it anyway, right? Sign here. The other side is that incapacity is often not recognized. So at least in a healthcare setting, of those many people who did not have capacity, only 1/4 of them were recognized by the healthcare team. From a medical legal point of view, that's a little concerning. So what are some red flags on an older adult who might have impaired decision-making capacity? If you know they have a history of dementia or depression or bipolar disorder, if they have that history, that does not mean they lack capacity, but it means you should think about it and maybe want to assess it. If they have fluctuating mental status, which you now know is a medical condition called delirium. If they live in a long-term care facility, particularly assisted living or nursing home level care, that does not mean they lack capacity, it just is a red flag to you. If they have advanced age, and every year that I give this talk, I change the definition of advanced age. But generally, to me, it's somebody who's pushing 90 or above. Or if somebody's refusing treatment or evaluation when it's really quite obvious they need to be treated or evaluated, that should raise a red flag to you. Finally, I just want to take the last few minutes to talk about how assessing capacity should be conducted. A frequent mistake that's made by not only healthcare professionals but the general public is to equate dementia with incapacity. Mr. Smith has Alzheimer's disease, therefore he cannot make decisions about his finances. Don't do that. We know that at least half of patients with mild to moderate dementia have intact capacity to make healthcare and financial decisions. The other side of that coin is to equate social greetings and reasonably intact orientation, as I did with Gwendolyn a few minutes ago. I asked her very simple, socially context, yes-no questions. She gave me yes-no answers, and I erroneously assumed she had decision-making capacity, or I could have erroneously assumed it. This is what's happening out there. So many people with impaired capacity are not recognized, and many people who actually have dementia still might retain capacity for particular decisions. The assessment process should involve a review of their medical diagnoses, all their medical diagnoses, and their current medications. Many medications that older adults take can impair their thinking process. Many. Not only the ones that are recognized to do it. Because if this drug is recognized to do it and this one isn't, when they take them together, this one could actually be a problem as well. And have you ever met an older adult who's taking 3 or more medications? Right. Yeah, I saw one once. I want to do the assessment of their current where are they living, what type of support do they need. And then I'm going to do a very thorough assessment of their cognitive and affective state, their mood and their thinking. And then I want to particularly, and this is where it's focused, I want to assess their understanding of the decision at hand. If it has to do with continuing to send $5,000 checks to someone on the phone, or bank accounts, or as we often see, older widowed men who are being scammed by young women, and they just keep giving them money, and it goes on and on and on. The clinical interview is the cornerstone of the evaluation, and I really want to highlight this to you. If you're looking at a medical evaluation of decision-making capacity and all you're getting is the results of testing, mini-mental status test, this test, that test, I would tell you to be skeptical about that evaluation. So if I sit down and interview someone and talk and ask them to tell me about their history, that's when I learn about their language problems, their memory, their motivation, and many other areas. So the clinical interview is the cornerstone. The mental status tests are not designed to be standalone. They're supplemental. Do they know what's going on? Are they aware of what's happening? Are they delusional? Are they continuing to believe something despite abundant evidence that it's not true? And do they acknowledge the available options? So if you're talking about a particular decision, you want to ask them, tell me what's going on. What's the issue here? What are your choices? If you do this, what are the good parts and the bad parts? If you do that, what are the good parts? So you just want to weigh their ability to weigh their options. That's decision making. And you have to recognize the pros and cons, as I said. Now, they may come to a decision. It may not be the decision I would come to. I might think they're making a big mistake, but that's not relevant. What's relevant is that they arrive at that decision through a reasoned process. If they arrived at that decision based on delusional thinking, I'm not going to be comfortable with that. So in closing then, the key points: no diagnosis that any patient has automatically assigns or impairs an impaired decision making. It can raise your doubts. You should be skeptical, but it doesn't mean they lack capacity. Be aware of the shell of capacity. That is, if you ask simple yes-no questions, you might get good answers, but that doesn't tell you anything about their mental status. And when in doubt, request that their capacity be assessed and assessed properly. Thank you.
First of all, everything I'm about to tell you is in an article that was just published by the Division of the Aging. It's in your jump drive. I brought copies if anybody doesn't have any. But the overall problem is something really strange going on in our society. It's wonderful that we're in Roanoke talking about this right now, but on a statewide basis, even on a national basis, we have combined an entire spectrum, which is what Dr. Oberlander was getting into, of dementia and dementia-related disorders, and that is colliding with something else that's going on, which is the largest wealth transfer in the history of our country, and it's colliding. And what's created by that is a lot of mischief and misconduct. The good news is it's avoidable. In fact, there's a lot of free things that you can do to avoid that, and I want to just focus on that as well. I've consolidated this into 10 things, okay? And for each principle, I'm going to give you There's about 5 or 6 for each one. I'm going to pick one just for sake of time. For example, understanding how financial transactions can be managed. You can minimize exploitation. I'll give you an easy one, direct deposit, okay? And now you're thinking, why did I drive all the way here so Chris Desimone could tell me to use direct deposit? It's actually an asset protection device, okay? Direct deposit is no longer just for the 82-year-old Mrs. Smith who goes on vacation and wants her bills paid. It actually provides a tracer mechanism in case we need it for forensic purposes. So direct deposit is an excellent way to minimize exploitation. No longer do we have the grandson who takes grandmother's check that she signed, the Social Security check, and he dutifully takes it down and puts it into her bank account until one day he doesn't. And then they find out and grandmother doesn't want to prosecute grandson and it tears the family apart. Use direct deposit. It's free, okay? Understand patterns of perpetrators. They're all the same. If we listed out the top 6, 7 things, they're all there, okay? For example, don't make checks payable to cash, okay? Another easy one, right? It doesn't cost any more money to put somebody's name on it. That's a huge red flag, okay? I won't talk about the reporting, but that's one of the #1 things that banks look for now. When you walk in there and just keep making checks payable to cash, there's no reason to do it. I had a case recently with 2 caregivers, and they insisted, they said, we're not committing income tax fraud, we're going to report that income, but they're on Social Security disability. And I said, well, congratulations, you know, either you're committing income tax fraud or Social Security disability fraud. Pick your poison, but don't make checks payable to cash. It's a free, easy thing to do. It also provides a tracer mechanism, okay? Again, you can always reconstruct things forensically if things are not made payable to cash. That is important. #2, I just want to throw this in, even though I said I do one. I had a call 3 months ago from a woman at Brandon Oaks here in town, and she was going through the story that the person on the phone was talking to her about. And I stopped her and asked her one question, and what's the question? Did they ask you if you lived alone? And she said, Chris, that's amazing. That's the first thing they asked me, right? They all do. If you live alone, that tremendously increases your target. So understand some of the recurring patterns of perpetrators. #3, figure out how bank accounts work. Most people don't understand liabilities. I wrote creditors, predators, in-laws, outlaws. For example, avoid jointly owned bank accounts. It's an easy way to minimize family exploitation, right? People are out there slapping names on and off of accounts. You're not going to listen to me anyway. You're going to go home and put your daughter's name on the brokerage or your son on the CD. Understand what that does, okay? That greatly increases the opportunity for family exploitation. And there's a bunch of other things that it does as well that are adverse that I won't get into. But when you put somebody else's name on an account, you increase the chance you're going to lose that money. Because if your son gets in a car accident and gets sued, they're coming after that bank account. Your daughter falls down and hits her head and has medical bills, that account is part of it. If your son's going through a divorce, that's disclosable in the divorce. Divorces, bankruptcies, creditors, IRS. In fact, I had a woman walk into my office, even though I warned her, she had a perfect daughter, had no problems, no creditors, no bankruptcy, no liability, but her husband, the daughter's husband, filed an income tax return with the IRS that was not exactly correct. And the IRS seized $177,000 out of this woman's checking and money market because she put somebody else's name on it. And what did I tell her? Tough, right? So there's another reason why you have to be careful with that, because it jeopardizes the money. But it certainly increases family exploitation when you slap names on and off of accounts. Understand what a power of attorney is. And by the way, there's 2 types. I'm not talking about medical power of attorney. That's an advanced medical directive, which is both a living will that allows you to authorize withholding of means of artificial support or pull the plug if that's what somebody wants to do, commonly known. The other part to that is a healthcare power of attorney that allows you to choose somebody to make medical decisions if you can't. I'm not talking about medical, I'm talking about financial power of attorney, right? Financial powers of attorney in and of themselves don't protect assets. It's a myth. And I'm sorry to be the one to tell you that. I got the person coming into my office, waving the power of attorney. It's almost like there's music in the background. He's like, I'm the power of attorney. But my uncle who's laying in the hospital just signed the farm over to my cousin. He walked in the hospital, my uncle signed the deed, it's gone. Having the power of attorney is a piece of paper. It doesn't protect assets in and of itself. I asked that agent, I said, well, what did you do with the power of attorney? Did the power of attorney say what it was supposed to say? Ensure that it gives you the authority to do certain things. Powers of attorney give people access, sometimes gifting. I mean, it's a huge problem, and people don't realize that. It's as much a problem as it is a solution. We're working on cases right now where the person who ripped off the older adult was the power of attorney agent. So powers of attorney in and of themselves don't protect assets. Make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. If I have one more person come in and say, oh, I'm going to pick the guy down the street, he's like a son to me. She's like a daughter to me. If I hear that, I instantly know there's a 50-50 shot they're going to get ripped off years from now. And we have the cases to support that. Be careful with that, okay? Number 5, preserve family harmony, okay? Use care agreements, for example. Family A, which Mr. Smith lost his wife. He's living alone. He has a daughter who lives in town. He's got 2 sons out of state, right? Daughter just cares for him, does the right thing by her dad. 7 years pass, right? And finally, daughter's husband says, you know, your dad ought to give you something here, you know, and nobody's disputing that. And he deeds the house, the $300,000 house to her, right? And all of a sudden you have exploitation claims because people kind of go overboard there. The 2 sons out of state bring suit or get all mad and everybody's upset. So there's overcompensation as well. Avoid that. Use a care agreement. The care agreement is where there's actually an agreement for daughter to care for dad, and you get assets for doing that. He transfers money to daughter. Why is that important? It preserves family harmony because the sons, it's all above board, it's all transparent. But secondly, the other family that didn't do that wasn't Medicaid eligible. They actually depleted all that time and labor for the daughter, and they never became Medicaid eligible. And the family that did do it walked in and lawfully is eligible for government assistance because they properly depleted assets. You can't do this retroactively, but it really is a good way to preserve family harmony as well. Where to find information? People ask me this all the time. This is easy. It's easy and it's free, like all this stuff. I had a family in 3 months ago where the brother and sister were sitting in front of me ripping their hair out and arguing like crazy. We don't know if she's still on those oil rights in Kansas and the REIT, and we don't know what she had. And they brought in piles of files and information. It was just stacked high. And I just, as they were arguing, I just spotted a 1040 off to the side, you know, an old tax return. I just slid it aside, and they're still arguing. And I flipped the Schedule B on the 1040 and turned it around, and I said, here's her 8 accounts, okay? It's free. Look at this. Start with the Schedule B on the 1040. They're all listed on there. The way the IRS works, they're notified of every income-producing asset in America. They send you 1099s every year for that. We all know what they are, and they're all reportable on the Schedule B. Even if you have an old tax return, it's a good way to reconstruct, and it's free. They're reported right there. They were just listing out. And then they started arguing about real estate after that. And I said, you know what, just stop. And what did I do? I went over the computer in 2 minutes and found all the real estate she owned. How did I do that? Using the GIS system, which is, Virginia has adopted that. And they weren't sure if she had given away the half interest at the farm in Montgomery County or Bedford or something. Click, 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 30 seconds, free. It's all free. If you're really stuck, go to unclaimed property. We do that all the time. I went in a hoarder's house the other day, and there was Hershey cans, about 4,000 of them. And so I started opening them, and we pulled out $85,000 of uncashed checks for the last decade. Where did I need to go there? Unclaimed property. We got all the money back, right? Because all those institutions are required to report that. And if you're really in a pinch, just do mail forwarding. That's not free. That's $1.05 in Virginia. So it's $1. You have to have fiduciary capacity to do that, meaning you have to have been appointed. You can't just mail, you can't mail forward your neighbor's mail or your cousin's mail or something like that. You have to be the fiduciary. But if you are, do mail forwarding. In 30 days, you find everything. It's virtually free. You get all the statements. So you can reconstruct this by using Schedule B in a mail forwarding or an unclaimed property, or just do a GIS search. It's easy. I can find out what everybody in this room owns fairly easily. It's easier than you think, and it's free. Next thing, which is number 7, is keeping people informed. I want to talk about communication real briefly. Communication is free. Have family members talk to each other. We talk to each other. Professionals, neighbors. It's amazing what you can glean when you talk to people. Dr. Oberländer alluded to this, but I had a family in about 2 months ago, and Dad was beyond moderate dementia. He was kind of toward the end of the spectrum, but he kept talking about taking care of this girl, and everybody just kind of blew it off. And we were kind of walking out, and I said, you know what, I just something in my gut. I said, let's go back and sit down. And we sat down, and it turned out that he gave $16,000 to a bank teller. People with dementia are trying to give us clues. They will give you clues. We have to just listen. And the way she did it was fabulous. He was making checks payable to cash, which he shouldn't, to family members of $8,000. The teller figured it out and had 2 of those checks. They went right in the branch, and he transferred the actual $8,000 to her. And it was never going to be caught if he didn't talk about it, because it was assumed that was some other family members getting the money. Communicate and listen. It is important. The role of a fiduciary, this is probably the most important part. 99% of financial exploitation is avoidable. I know you don't want to hear that because it seems like it's something we just have to live with. We don't. It is absolutely avoidable. So understand what a fiduciary is. By the way, that is like an agent under a power of attorney, or a trustee of a trust, or an executor of a will. And we're not talking about wills because somebody has already died at that point. But an agent under a power of attorney or a trustee of a trust, that is called a fiduciary. And it's important that you understand what a fiduciary is. Let me give you an example, in fact. I've got a ton of examples that I'd like to say, but for purposes of time, I just want to pick one because it's tougher than you think. Mr. and Mrs., let's make up a name, Ferris. They live in the Blue Ridge Mountains. They have no kids. They have 2 nephews that they love dearly, but they're kind of estranged, and they live far away. And Mr. Ferris died. So Mrs. Ferris is alone. She's got a house and a bank account. She doesn't have a whole lot. Very important part. People think about asset protection being for the rich. Completely false, right? I would argue with you that it's even more important the less money that you have. It is even more important to make sure you protect it because you might need it down the road for long-term care or other issues. So the 65-year-old neighbor down the street starts coming around quite a bit. He fixes her porch, she makes some lemonade, they go out to lunch, dinner, they're hooting and hollering, having a good time. Great, right? I'm getting calls from the neighbors. Chris, I guarantee he's up to no good. Chris, he's up to no good. The CPA called me, the broker called me. What do you do? Right? Pretty typical situation, but it's difficult. What do you do in that case? I know most of you, because you're good people, you'd say, well, we call the authorities, right? Pick up the phone and call the authorities. Maybe, maybe not. Here's the secret to fiduciary planning, which is difficult. It's a chess game, okay? I'm going to just clue you in on one little strategy that has been critically important in protecting people's assets. It's called the sequencing strategy. In every case, this is critical. It is less important which actions you take. It is more important when you take those actions. Sequencing is much more critical than the actual action itself. In this case, I happen to be the fiduciary in that case, fortunately. What did I do with that? I did nothing. I did nothing. You can throw things at me now and say, what do you mean you did nothing? I sat there and did nothing and said, I'm not going to call the authorities because I also know that when you sometimes if you call the authorities and the government shows up and it's a 92-year-old in Blue Ridge with a 65-year-old, sometimes you run the risk, which is very real, that he has not done anything wrong yet. And you run the risk, which is very real under these circumstances, that you'd actually drive her into the arms, so to speak, of the very predator who everybody knew was a predator. And down the road, he'll POD or TOD the brokerage account, or she'll will things to him. I know what was going to happen. I've been through this. So what did I do as the fiduciary? I did something that took 30 seconds and it's free. I sent in a request to the bank for a duplicate statement and sat back and waited, right? And month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nothing happened. Maybe everybody's wrong about this guy. I doubt it. Month 6, 7th, 8th came. Still nothing. And then month 9 came. And I got that in the mail, and that's what I needed. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. He had direct deposits, debits coming off. He's setting up credit cards. She was paying his propane. That's what you need. That's when I got in the car and drove up there, and we all gathered the forces because she had some mild, moderate dementia, but that's what you need in that case to show her black and white. It's not enough to say he's up to no good. Not every 92-year-old will accept that, or government knocking on their door. It's like sending the revenuers into Franklin County, okay? It's not what you think. It's not as easy as you think, okay? Even the most well-meaning, wonderful person who's sweet and nice, it can be misconstrued. So I knew what to do in that case, and it was free and easy, and she lived out her life in peace. You know, he was gone, and she lived her life in peace. She died 2 years ago, and her, money went to her nephews and whatnot. But it is important. I wish that people would treat fiduciary, even like plumbers, poor plumbers. I got people calling me from their house. I'm not letting my plumber through the screen door until he tells me he's licensed and bonded and insured. Or electrician, poor guys, licensed, bonded, insured, licensed, bonded, insured. Yet they pick fiduciaries because somebody down the street's a nice person. And you're trusting them with everything you own and everyone you love. And they can do great damage, or they can protect your life savings. So, choose the right fiduciary. You're choosing one anyway. 2 more quick things. What can you do right now? The main point here is this. You have a certain range of decision-making ability. When an event occurs, it becomes less. So take an action before there's an incapacity. That is the bottom line. And that doesn't have to be death, right? It can be a disability. It can be an incapacity, incompetency, all of those things. Take action while you still have the full range of decision-making ability. That's the message. It doesn't cost any more to do that up front. In fact, sometimes when you wait, your options are restricted. So people always say, well, I want to set it up and avoid court and all that stuff. Great, do that. It's a good thing to do. And also keep in mind that the purpose of it is to protect you during your lifetime. That gets lost. That really does. A lot of people are like, oh, you know, who gets stuff when you die? I don't care. All right, that's secondary. The primary purpose of planning is to make sure you are taken care of for your lifetime. That is the number one purpose, and people always confuse that. You know, someday I want to get a checklist. If you ask seniors out here, they'll say, what are you afraid of? How are you going to lose your money? And then exploitation is not even on the chart. They'll say, well, the market will crash. Well, you can kind of hedge that with cash. You know, I'm going to get sued. Well, you're 83. I doubt you're going to be sued for anything. You don't have a business, you know. And they go through the list. Their long-term care costs, which are legitimate, right? But they're afraid, they don't even think about exploitation. I get retirement checklists in the mail, you probably do too, from all the brokerages and financial institutions. We will know we've made it when you can pick that up and the right question is on the list. Because every time it's the top 50 things you should do for retirement planning, you know, check your IRAs and make sure your walls are wide enough for a wheelchair and check this and check that. I've seen all those checklists. None of them ask the right question. Not even in the top 100 things for retiree. We will know we are all successful when I get one of those in the mail and it says, have you taken the necessary actions to prevent exploitation? That's not even on the checklist right now. Right now it's 100 people in Roanoke and we're all trying to figure this out. That's when we'll know we've arrived, when we get that checklist and it actually says that. Lastly, last thing I want you to keep in mind is control the information flow. It's free to do this, okay? Don't come into my office and say, my goodness, my Uncle Joe keeps getting these phone calls. They're not even scammers. They're just people selling credit cards and they want to pave his driveway and all this other stuff and he's signing up for all these things. Did you put him on the do not call list? donotcall.gov? It's free. I put myself on the list just because I wanted a great reduction. And it doesn't, you know, politicians can still call you and of course if somebody else is, they're usually a scammer. But do that, you know, don't walk into my office and say, Aunt Irma gets all this junk mail and she's applying for sweepstakes and credit cards and all that. Did you put her on the do not mail list? All right, it's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's $1.50. Gosh, you know, I'm trying to do all this free stuff. And the last thing I'll say, and I will sit down, I'm gonna make sure, I got, it looks like 30 seconds. Okay. This is where we're going in the future, and I wanted to mention this, okay? Because some people are going in the opposite direction. Some people are trying to go off the grid with a less of a technological approach. And I just keep this in mind. You have to fight technology with technology. That is the way we're going to win this battle. This is the crime of the 21st century. We are at the tip of the iceberg. You've seen nothing. What is latent and what is coming, it's going to be 100 times what you're seeing now. People are getting ripped off all different kinds of ways, and you have to fight technology. For example, I use identity theft protection platforms to fight exploitation because it's similar software program. For example, if I'm in charge of something and there's somebody right now in Arkansas using somebody's social and doing a fraudulent mortgage or a credit card or whatever fraud they're doing, right? That is actually reportable to the credit reporting agency. In prior days, it wouldn't be instantaneously caught, but it shoots up to a credit reporting agency. So what I use is identity theft protection software, which instantly extracts the information from the credit reporting bureau and then sends me alerts. So I'm at a computer in Roanoke, Virginia. There's a fraud out in Arkansas. 20 years ago, we never would have caught this in time. It's instantly to the credit reporting bureau, instantly to the identity theft protection software, and I get an alert instantly. That's how we're going to do it. We got to fight technology with technology. So keep that in mind. I'm out of time. Plan properly. Thank you. You're up.
I'm sure as many of you know, the financial crimes can be pretty difficult to detect. It's not as easy as physical abuse where you can see bruises on somebody, you can see cuts. You typically know pretty quickly that something has happened. With financial cases, we don't have that. It's silent. So it really takes everybody paying attention and looking out for somebody to be able to catch what has happened. The Adult Protective Services had 1,158 cases of financial exploitation in 2016. So typically, people that are doing this are trusted. It's the neighbor, it's the family member, it's the closest person to that individual. And because they have that level of trust, they usually have access to everything. They know where the assets are and they know how to get it. The APS estimated that the total loss in 2016 was over $28 million, and that was just in the state of Virginia for financial exploitation. And that's just the cases that we know about. Most victims aren't going to report it because they're scared. They're scared that they're going to get removed from their house, and they're also afraid that it's a sign that they can't take care of themselves. And usually, as they said earlier, usually the victims live alone. They're in their own house, they're in their own apartment, so there's not somebody there regularly 24/7 that's watching what's happening. And I'm sure you all have heard of all the scams that are out there, Facebook scams. We've seen cases where someone's Facebook page was copied, and they took the profile picture, they took the name, and then they started messaging the friends. And they said, hey, we went to high school together. Do you want to know how you can make a quick dollar or two? And next thing you know, they're sending thousands of dollars overseas in hopes that they're going to make money doing that. There's also the phone calls. I'm sure you'll have heard all of the scam phone calls of send MoneyGrams or money cards, and you're going to make money doing that. Send us $1,000 and we'll turn around and send you $10,000. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? And there's also email scams where emails can get intercepted. And we've seen this with mortgage closings, where they'll get a hold of closing statements, and next thing you know, the routing number and bank account number have been changed so that it goes somewhere, usually overseas. So there's a lot of different code sections that we use with elder abuse and elder fraud, and really it just depends on the case. It depends on what has happened. Is it a power of attorney that has taken over and started signing the person's name and gotten their checkbook? In that case, we actually charge that as embezzlement because there is some level of trust that's there and you are a fiduciary of the person's assets at that point. And also construction fraud. You pay for the work up front and then they never come back. And they seem to target elders when they do that. So more recently, we're hearing a lot about power of attorneys, and I know that got touched on earlier. It used to be that if somebody had a power of attorney, law enforcement right off the bat would say that's a civil issue, there's nothing that we can do for that. Well, since the Power of Attorney Act in 2010, some things have changed. And if you all want some reading material, the Code of Virginia 64.2-1612 lists the agent's duties for a power of attorney. And in that, it says that a power of attorney must act in the principal's best interest. So if they're taking the money and they're using it for themselves, then that's deemed larceny. It's got to be in the interest of the adult. And like I said earlier, they usually have access to all of the assets and also the identity. It seems like now if somebody loses their wallet somewhere, they're not interested in getting your cash that's out of the wallet. They want your identity. Because you can get far more with somebody's identity than you can with a couple of dollars that they have in their wallet. And also, with the people that have trust, they've got access to checks, and that's where we see the checks that are wrote to cash, jewelry, collectibles, coins, clocks, documents where they can find what their net worth is, where their bank accounts are, their birth certificate, social security card, stock certificates too. And this is where Chris was saying earlier, we're kind of getting away from where everything's done on paper. You know, we used to have the old paper stock certificates that you could take and cash in. Now all of that's done electronically. But for some of the seniors that are out there, they still have these paper stock certificates. And if somebody gets that, then they can pretty much cash out on that, and it can be hard to trace. Where with everything being electronic, it's very easy for me to come back through and do search warrants and follow the paper trail and be able to match everything up. And normally, the victims are blindsided by this. It's the person that they've trusted the most. They probably would have given the person anything in the world. So when it happens, everybody is shocked because it's usually the last person that they would have expected. And like I said earlier, the victims are scared, they're embarrassed to report it. Because they don't want to be taken out of their house, especially if they're living independently. They don't want to go to a nursing home. They want to be at home. They want to die at home. And a lot of, sometimes there is a token of mental abuse that has happened. And victims may have been told, this is the story that you need to tell. If anybody asks you, this is what you need to tell them. And if you don't tell them what I want you to tell them, I'm going to have you removed from your house. And the victims are scared because they really think that that's going to happen. It takes a lot of trust building to get somebody to actually tell you what is truly going on. So this is a new code section. In 2013, this came about for incapacitation and financial exploitation. Prior to this, there was an issue. If an individual was incapacitated, they couldn't testify in court. So how can we prove that they didn't or did have the ability to tell somebody that they could do financial decisions? It says using mental incapacitation to take, obtain, or convert money or other thing of value belonging to the person is a larceny. And in the state of Virginia, if it's over $200, that is a felony. The venue for this is going to be either where the act was performed or where the accused resided. And the mental incapacity means at the time of the offense, not later on down the road. So something that's important for this is that we know where the person was mentally when the act actually occurred. Had they been diagnosed with something, had they gone to see the doctor, we need a little bit more than somebody saying, I don't know that they're all there. And this section does not apply if the accused acted for the benefit of the person or they were making a good faith effort. This is for the person that knows what they're doing, that is actually taking away from the incapacitated person. And normally the suspects are family, close friend, or the caretaker. So these are some paper indicators that financial exploitation is going on. If mail has been changed and it's now going to a different address, and that address is not where the adult resides, that's usually a pretty big red flag that something is going on. And there are some people that don't want to take care of their own finances. They want their power of attorney to take care of the finances. They want a close friend to take care of their finances. And they have the mail changed, they never have any oversight, they don't know what's happened, and then years down the road they realize, holy cow, the person that I trusted has taken all this money from me, and I never even looked at anything. I didn't know that it was happening because I had full trust in them. Something that banks can look out for is unusual activity. If there are excessive payments, multiple mortgage payments being made to different banks, if there's multiple utility payments being made, and same with credit cards. If all of a sudden there's numerous credit card payments being paid out, and a year ago we didn't have any credit card payments, then that could be an indicator as well. Also, if bills are unpaid, if there's frequent past due notices that are coming in, if they normally had a history of paying on time and now all of a sudden payments aren't being made, but there's still withdrawals coming out of the account. And then in a lot of cases, the bank account gets completely depleted. And normally when that happens, the person that's depleted it, the suspect, they disappear because there's no money left. There's nothing else that they want that's there. So they tend to be out of the picture and just leave that person to figure it out. And large withdrawals. And that also goes back to checks that are wrote to cash. That's a huge red flag. If someone goes into the bank and they all of a sudden want to withdraw $10,000 and they haven't done a cash withdrawal in 5 years of that size, then that's definitely a red flag. And then new accounts being opened, particularly joint accounts, which got touched on earlier as well as credit accounts. If there's new credit accounts with authorized users or a joint account with that, then that's also a red flag. And there are frequent cases where an individual signs papers and they don't know what they've signed. And we've even seen that with power of attorneys, where an attorney went through what they thought was a checklist to see if the person knew what they were doing and had the capacitation to do so, and then they realize that they don't know what they signed later on down the road, or they think that they signed that because the person was going to help them with their bank account, or the person was going to help them remodel their house, and they don't realize that they've signed over complete power of attorney. And also, for attorneys, if there are power of attorney changes being made, is it being changed to someone that has completely come out of the blue and is all of a sudden being overly helpful for the individual? So some things to look for with victims of financial elder exploitation. their mental state, as we've talked about earlier. How do they appear to be mentally? Can they have a conversation with you? Do they know where they are, what day it is? Do they know what's happening around them? And who pays the bills? Are they paying the bills, or is somebody else paying the bills? Are they isolated? Is there a caretaker? Are their basic needs being met? Are they hungry? Does their clothing match the weather? If they're in a short sleeve shirt and flip-flops and it's wintertime, then there could be issues there. And if you try to have a conversation with somebody and it's dominated by somebody else, particularly the person that suddenly comes into the picture from out of the blue, then that's definitely a sign that something's happening. They're not able to speak for themselves, or they're unwilling to speak for themselves and answer your questions for what has happened. So we're going to talk a little bit about mandated reporting, which I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with the mandated reporting. There are going to be some changes made as of July 1st of this year. If you're not aware, Adult Protective Services, for every case of financial exploitation, they will be turned over to law enforcement. Currently, there's a $50,000 benchmark that they have, but as of July 1st, every single case is going to be getting turned over. And as I said earlier, that last year was over 1,100 cases that they had. So we'll be seeing a lot more of that. So for mandated reporting, it's matters giving reason to suspect the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of adults shall be reported immediately upon the reporting person's determination that there is such reason to suspect. And Adult Protective Services focuses on adults that are 60 and over and incapacitated persons ages 18 to 59 who have been abused, neglected, or exploited, or at risk of abuse, neglect, or exploitation without regard to income or resources. And in 2016, they had a total of 23,432 reports of adult abuse. That's a lot of cases. And they're also going to be changing the definition for adult exploitation, and they've struck the word incapacitated, if you all are familiar with that definition. So definitely some huge changes that are coming this year, and that could be thanks to the part of some of the people that are in the audience here. So mandated reporters are going to be your medical professionals. That includes mental health. EMS can report it to the attending physician at the hospital when they're transporting someone, any guardian or conservator of an adult, and law enforcement is on here too. So I'm actually a mandated reporter as well. And the civil penalty for not reporting is not more than $500 for the first offense, and not less than $100 nor more than $1,000 for subsequent offenses. And employers shall not prohibit a mandated reporter from reporting directly to the local department or APS hotline. And sometimes you hear people that are scared to report something because of issues with their employer. Medical professionals get worried about HIPAA. So this code section is there to help protect the employee as well as the employer from that. And if you all want any follow-up reading material, the Code of Virginia Title 63.2, Chapter 16 covers adult services, if anybody wants to go back and take a look at any more information on that. So we're just going to kind of touch on some quick ways to prevent financial exploitation. The biggest thing is to watch for signs. Most of my cases come from witnesses, and that includes banks, family members. It actually doesn't end up coming from the individual. So when I show up at the individual's house, there's a lot of rapport building that has to go on, or any law enforcement, APS too. You've got to build a little bit of rapport because they're scared. They don't want to get taken out of their house. They don't want you to think that they can't take care of themselves. So sometimes it takes a couple of visits before they'll actually tell us what has gone on. So really witnesses are so important to this. If you see somebody that is on their own, they're taking care of themselves, then get involved, talk to them, pay attention to what's going on. If they appear that they're declining mentally, then talk to their doctor, talk to their attorney if they've got an attorney. Reach out to other people and have conversations, as we've talked about. Communication is really key to this. So some ways that you can help is to document, take notes. If you start if you start seeing what you think is going to be financial exploitation, then just start documenting who is there, what is going on, what is being said, and hang on to that. Also, red flag the account. And this is really good for banks and medical professionals. Put notes in there. If the person is continuing to show up, then call law enforcement if you think that there's an issue going on. Communicate with your other colleagues. If it's a medical facility, then maybe communicate with the other staff that are in that facility so that they can pay attention to what's going on. And same with banking too, communicate. That way everybody knows what's going on, everybody can watch out for that person and watch out for the accounts. Also, talk to the attorneys and the doctors, get them evaluated if they have not already been evaluated, and look for signs that they're declining mentally and physically and emotionally too. Talk to their family members, get the family involved, and you can also report it to APS and law enforcement as well.